Welcome, everyone. My name is Dean Hollerith, and I'm the Dean of the National Cathedral here in Washington, D.C. On behalf of all the staff and the clergy of the Cathedral, we wish all of you a very happy 4th of July. Whether you're having an in-person celebration or one of the virtual kind, we hope you enjoy yourselves and celebrate this great day in our nation's history. One of our favorite traditions here at the Cathedral is our annual 4th of July concert, and is typically standing room only for the patriotic music and the stirring words of our nation's founders. This year, as you can see, we're temporarily closed as the COVID-19 virus continues to affect our world in new and unnerving ways. But that made us all the more determined to bring this concert to you. This cathedral here in our nation's capital was built as a house of prayer for all people and a great church for national purposes. For nearly 125 years now, this has been the place where the nation comes together to celebrate and to mourn. This Independence Day is especially poignant because it is a moment when celebration and mourning are bound together. We cannot forget those who have died and those who are grieving in the shadow of this pandemic. Today, this cathedral joins with you in mourning the suffering and death that has shaken us to our core. And yet, standing on the shoulders of generations before us, we face this new and challenging time with the same spirit that has defined this great nation for almost 250 years. We see that spirit in our healthcare professionals, our first responders, and all the everyday Americans who now step up as essential workers putting themselves at risk in service to their fellow citizens. We salute you today, thankful for all you're doing and praying for your continued strength and health during this time. So, our celebrations will look and feel a little different this year, but they should not be any less significant or heartfelt or thankful. The basis of our celebration today is simple: love of God, love of country, love of one another. Truthfully, there is little else we need. So God bless you, happy 4th of July, and now enjoy the concert.
Have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He hath loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. Glory, 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 hallelujah. Glory,
A letter from Abigail Adams to her husband, March 31st, 1776. I long to hear that you have declared an independency. And, by the way, in the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire that you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation.
The Declaration of Independence.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal,
that they are endowed by their Creator with certain
derechos inajenables,
That among these are life,
liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men,
derivando sus justos poderes del consentimiento de los pueblos.
that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends,
it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it,
and to institute new government, laying its foundation
On such principles and organizing its powers in such forms
as to them shall seem most likely.
to affect their safety and happiness.
we,
we therefore,
The representatives
De los Estados Unidos,
And General Congress assembled
appealing to the supreme judge of the world
for the rectitude of our intentions,
do, in the name and by the authority
of the good people of these colonies,
solemnly publish and declare
that these united colonies are,
and of right ought to be,
estados libres e independientes,
and for the support of this declaration,
with a firm reliance on the protection
of divine providence,
we mutually pledge to each other
our lives,
our lives,
our
fortunes,
fortunes,
and
and
our
our
sacred
sacred
honor.
honor.
nuestras vidas, nuestras fortunas y nuestro sagrado honor.
Abraham Lincoln, June 16, 1858. Mr. President and gentlemen of the convention, if we could first know where we are and whither we are tending, we could then better judge what to do and how to do it. We're now far into the 5th year since a policy was initiated with the avowed object and the confident promise of putting an end to slavery agitation. Under the operation of that policy, that agitation has not only not ceased, but has constantly augmented. In my opinion, it will not cease until a crisis shall have been reached and passed. A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the House to fall, but I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other. Either the opponents of slavery will arrest the further spread of it and place it where the public mind shall rest, and the belief that it is in course of ultimate extinction, or its advocates will push it forward till it shall become alike lawful in all the states, old as well as new, north as well as south.
This nation celebrated its first Independence Day in 1776. Today marks our 244th celebration of that momentous day. And over these many years, America has grown into one of the most admired democracies the world has ever known. Our democracy is precious. Our national flag, once bearing 13 stars, is now emblazoned with a star for each of our 50 states. Carried in each star are the hopes and aspirations of each of us. Many voices, yet one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Our quest for liberty predates our independence, and as we know, liberty does not come without cost. The sacrifice of many who enabled our founding fathers to shape our new democracy is the same sacrifice we ask of our men and women in uniform today. We could not be more grateful or more proud of those who serve in our armed forces, and we salute you today. In 2012, I took on a new mission to empower, support, and honor our nation's military and veteran caregivers, the young spouses, mothers, dads, and other loved ones caring for America's wounded, ill, and injured warriors at home. Independence Day 2020 falls under the shadow of a global pandemic. The warriors in military uniform now stand shoulder to shoulder with a civilian army fighting an enemy we cannot see. Courage is witnessed in many forms, be it on the battlefield, at a hospital bedside, and in the homes of loved ones who support our veterans. On this July 4th, let us celebrate especially those who, in the face of fear and harm, continue to protect this great nation. My husband Bob and I send you and yours warm wishes for a beautiful and blessed Independence Day.
Hello, I hope you're safe and well this 4th of July. This cathedral has been part of my life since I was 6 months old, and now I'm proud to be a member of the cathedral's governing body. As a pediatrician, I am honored to deliver this message on behalf of the cathedral as we celebrate this 4th of July during these challenging times. We are in St. Joseph's Chapel in the crypt of the cathedral. Each Saturday, we hold a simple service of remembrance here, reading aloud the names of those who've lost their lives to COVID-19, then placing a memorial card on the wall of this chapel. We know that many of these people spent their last days in isolation in intensive care units, unable to be with loved ones. But they were not alone. Dedicated and compassionate healthcare workers were there with them. I have been inspired by colleagues across the country for their tremendous fortitude, giving every last measure of themselves to save lives under extraordinary pressures. I also want to recognize the many, many essential workers who continue to show up day after day at much risk to themselves. Their sacrifices allow us to live as normal a life as possible during these strange and alienating times. They are heroes, every one of them. We salute and thank you for all you do. Finally, I want to recognize the communities hardest hit by this pandemic. We have seen the older population, ethnic minorities, and people living in poverty overrepresented among hospitalized and dying patients. We must do our very best to support and sustain the most impacted by COVID-19. This crisis is one we must face and overcome together. And the American spirit that has so defined the greatest moments of our history is needed now more than ever.
Hey everybody, Michael W. Smith here. On this day where we celebrate our nation's birth amid uncertain times of a global pandemic, we need to look around and be reminded of the acts of love that are happening everywhere. We see this most clearly in the faces of our healthcare professionals and essential workers. Our ability to express love is the light by which we find stability and purpose as a nation. So celebrate this day in a way that is meaningful to you. We salute all those who have shown unquestioning love and commitment to our fellow citizens in this unique moment of our nation's history. Happy 4th.
While there is much about the American spirit we celebrate today, our country continues to struggle with the reality of systemic racism that erodes the very fiber of our civil society. The lasting legacy of slavery, America's original sin, is a burden that sits heavily on this nation. At a time when we are all hoping and praying for the quick discovery of a vaccine for the COVID-19 virus, we must take a stand and commit to eliminating the other pandemic we call racism. We must embrace the call for justice and the need to heal. For without justice and healing, we will not live up to the aspirations of so many who have strived and sacrificed for this country. On the 31st of March in 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. visited this cathedral. Preaching from our Canterbury pulpit, he recounted the story of Rip Van Winkle. 52 years later, the opening of this sermon on that spring day could not be more prophetic for the times in which we live. Just 4 days later, Dr. King was assassinated while standing on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee.
I would like to use as a subject from which to preach this morning, remaining awake through a great revolution. And the text for the morning is found in the book of Revelation. There are two passages there that I would like to quote. It's in the 16th chapter of that book. Behold, I make all things new. Former things are passed away. I'm sure that most of you have read that arresting little story from the pen of Washington Irving, entitled Rip Van Winkle. The one thing that we usually remember about the story is that Rip Van Winkle slept 20 years. But that is another point in that little story that is almost always completely overlooked. It was a sign in the end, from which Rip went up in the mountain for his long sleep. When Rip Van Winkle went up in the mountain, the sign had a picture of King George III of England. When he came down 20 years later, the sign had a picture of George Washington, the first president of the United States. And Rip Van Winkle looked up at the picture of George Washington, but in looking at the picture, he was amazed. He was completely lost. He knew not who he was. And this reveals to us that the most striking thing about the story of Rip Van Winkle is not merely that Rip slept 20 years, but that he slept through a revolution. While he was peacefully snoring up in the mountain, a revolution was taking place that at points would change the course of history. And Rip knew nothing about it. He was asleep. Yes, he slept through a revolution. One of the great liabilities of life is that all too many people find themselves living amid a great period of social change, and yet they fail to develop the new attitudes, the new mental responses that the new situation demands. they end up sleeping through a revolution.
My country, 'tis of thee sweet and of liberty, of thee I sing. And where my fathers died, land of the Pilgrim's Pride, from every mountain side let freedom
As we continue to move through these uncertain times, I'm reminded of a young American lawyer who in 1814 was held captive on a British ship just offshore in Baltimore Harbor. In the face of overwhelming onslaught, there was little hope that the city of Baltimore could be held. Yet at dawn's early light, amidst the smoke of war, Francis Scott Key glimpsed a large flag with 15 stars and 15 stripes, still flying high over Fort McHenry. It's a reminder that even in our darkest moments, the spirit and fortitude of the American people can prevail over our greatest challenges. I hope you've enjoyed being with us, and I'm going to ask now, where possible, that you stand and join with Miss Denyce Graves in singing the national anthem. Happy 4th of July. God bless you and keep you this day and always.